ॐ सहनावतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शांति शांति शांति। Namaste to everyone. We at Advait Academy welcome you all. The 1 month long Oneness Festival, a global celebration of Adi Shankaracharya Ji. In this session, we have a live talk on Shankaracharya the Visionary by Professor T.S. Rukmini Ji, followed by question answer, and then a video presentation by Sadashiv Bhatt with his Saundarya Lahari rendition based on Hindustani ragas. Please stay back for both. And for the new attendees, we have 4 different sessions every day. 2 in the morning at 6 a.m. Indian Standard Time and 2 in the evening at 6:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. We also have an extra session of music on Saturday and Sunday right after the morning sessions and an hour before evening sessions. Professor T.S. Rukmini has a distinguished academic record and has been teaching the resenting mainly in the areas of Hinduism, Advaita Vedanta, Sankhya Yoga for last 40 years. She has taught in India, South Africa, where she held the first chair for Hindu studies and Indian philosophy at University of Durban, Westville, and joined the Department of Religion, Concordia University, Montreal, Canada, as professor and chair of Hindu studies in 1996. Professor T.S. Rukmini has won many awards for her 4-volume work on Vijnana Bhikkhu's Yoga Vartika and her 2-volume work on Shankaracharya's Yoga Sutra Bhashya Vivarana have been widely acclaimed in scholarly circles. She has also written and edited 7 other books dealing with different aspects of religion, philosophy, and has published many research papers in academic journals both in India and other parts of the world. You may type in your questions and comments in the chat box, and I will pick up a few at the end of the talk for Rukmini Ji. Now I request Professor Rukmini Ji to please start her talk. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. You can unmute Rukmini Ji and start, please.
Okay. Dhanyavada. Thank you very much for that introduction, Srinivas Ji. Yes, my topic today is Shankaracharya, a visionary. I'd like to start with defining the term visionary itself. Who is a visionary? A visionary is one who can look into the future and be able to focus on the essentials that are necessary in order to maintain the culture of the land. Well, let us come to the topic itself. The history of a nation is the history of its great men and women. They are the ones who have the ideas, they shape the culture of the land, and they have the imagination to also come up with ideas which can be sustained for a very long time. In that galaxy of eminent people, the first amongst them are our rishis, the Vedic rishis, who really laid the foundation for Indian culture. Now, what are the basic values which the Vedic rishis imagined will help the nation to become strong and united? The first, of course, I cannot, in the short time available, I cannot analyze all the values which have been, as I said, the Vedic rishis determined that there were certain values which they had to promote in order to be able to sustain the culture of the land. I will pinpoint a few of them. I cannot do the whole lot because it's a vast literature. The first and foremost, they had the idea that there should be unity in diversity. Just as we have many religions today, many people quarreling about different philosophical systems, we need not think that it was any different in olden times also. So let's imagine that there were many philosophical schools, religious schools vying with each other to gain supremacy. In that context, the rishis, they came up with a unique idea. Having seen the ground situation, they came up with this idea that reality or the absolute truth can only be one. After all, it seems so simple when you state it that way. You cannot have two absolutes because they will cancel each other. So there can be only one absolute truth. So they laid it down, and we have this beautiful cryptic statement, Ekam Sat Vipraha Baudha Vadanti. I would even add, Ekam Eva Sat Dvijaha Bahudha Vadanti. There can be only one truth. In fact, the world even today is searching for that ultimate truth. Both scientists, philosophers, religious people, and the search goes on. But the Vedic rishis have already given us a solution, which is a kind of harmonious solution where everyone can enjoy their pet belief and yet be able to live in harmony. The second one is they thought about this whole phenomenon as a unity, a holistic vision determined the way they looked at the world. There was a symbiotic relationship between the micro and the macro dimensions, and that comes out very clearly in the Purusha Sukta of the Rig Veda. Now, this is an absolutely important concept because it has sustained itself throughout the ages, and even today, 21st century, we still find people talking about ecology and environmental ethics, which looks for a holistic vision of the entire universe. Now, this is already a value which the Vedic rishis were able to come up with. Another one was that in an atmosphere, there was intellectual freedom in Vedic times, and so it wasn't as if they were constrained and they could come up, they had the freedom to think, and they came up with many solutions. While Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahudha Vadanti was able to solve one kind of an enigma in the minds of the people, there was another kind of an enigma because they had to define what this ultimate absolute was. Is it existence or is it non-existence? Could this whole universe come out of something which exists, or can it come out of something which does not exist and it just comes out by chance? Now, this is again, we haven't known the solution. Even today, we don't have a proper solution to it. Now, in the Nasadiya Sukta, the first line says, Nasadasid, Nosadasid, Tadanim. At that time, the Rishi is speculating. He is talking about what could be possibly the nature of the ultimate reality. So he says, can it be existence or can it be non-existence? And of course, he gives many, it can be darkness, it can be water. He goes on. It's a very small sukta. Sukta means a collection of mantras. And there are only 7 mantras here. And the last one is wonderful. It states that we will never know. Can the devas even know who is the ultimate or the nature of the ultimate reality? Now, you see, what is important here is the Rishi was allowing himself or herself to think about the whole thing in a logical manner, and also gives room for skepticism, because a skeptic is the one who really advances knowledge, and then says we have in the Rig Veda and in Vedic literature this kind of an intellectual freedom to even question the basic beliefs of a society. As far as the environmental ethics is concerned, I forgot to mention that you have this beautiful, apart from the Purusha Sukta, you have this beautiful 63 mantras of Prithvi Sukta in the Atharva Veda, which has gained universal recognition now during this environmental ethics situation. Excuse me, I'll just have a little water. Now, apart from all these intellectual activities, we all know unless there is social harmony, it is not possible to do any kind of intellectual or emotional activity. So this, again, the Vedic rishis hit upon they talk about social harmony in this beautiful mantra, Sangachadvam, Samvadadvam, Samvo Manansi Jayanda. So you can get a feeling that the rishis had a holistic vision of society. What are the elements that can go into sustaining the culture of the land? As soon as we finish with the Vedic period, you come to the post Vedic period. And the post Vedic period, I will only talk about the Upanishads. Now, what was suggested in the Rig Veda as one single ultimate truth, Ekam Sat, that got developed further in the Upanishads. And they not only talked about the Sat or the reality in an abstract sense, they also gave it a name. It is Brahman. As far as the Upanishads are concerned, the ultimate reality was termed as Brahman. And don't forget, there was still the unity. You have the micro and the macro dimensions. So if the macro is Brahman, then the micro, which is the individual self, which is termed as Atman in the Upanishads, that also has to have a unity with the macro Brahman. So they came up with the Paramatman and Jivatman identity. That was a leap philosophy. In philosophers, we call it a leap philosophy. Apart from this conception of Brahman and Atman, the Upanishads also contributed to a number of new ideas like the karma theory, moksha, and of course, the basic thing was they also conceived of the Atman as being permanent. That means transmigration or birth from one birth to another was also conceived, because the karma theory cannot otherwise function if you do not have the same Atman having births in succeeding periods. Now, the Arya, not only that, what is more important is they had the imagination to even talk about Jivan Mukti. Moksha is a liberation from the world. We can talk about it as a state of the mind, but it is possible. You don't have to wait for the death to happen in order to achieve liberation. Now, this was a unique idea which the Upanishads came up, and it came up because of the rishis thinking of that basic idea in the Rig Veda itself. I don't think any other philosophy or any other religion in the world has this concept of Jivan Mukti, which is embodied liberation. And so that is the Upanishad period for you. But more than that, I would like to stress the importance of the means they allowed you to attain moksha. Because normally it is all, even Kant, for instance, in Western philosophy, tells you that you can never realize the noumenon. You can only know what the phenomenon is. But here in the Upanishads, it was possible. They stated that it is possible to attain moksha and realize the identity with Brahman. But what is unique about the Upanishads is they did not minimize the importance of knowledge. Instead, not even not minimizing, it is probably in some Upanishads, knowledge or jnana is mentioned as the only means to the attainment of moksha. Now, to Shankara's mind, you please remember, I am going with the theory that Shankara lived somewhere in the 7th century AD. So by Shankara's time, you had all these ideas floating around. And Shankara must have had access to all these ideas. And as far as he was concerned, there were some other big problems which the society was facing. There was a threat because Vedic culture was under threat. There were movements like Buddhism and Jainism, which had a strong foothold in the society. And I'm sure a number of young people were following the path of Buddhism and Jainism. Not only that, religious vociferous tendencies amongst various religious groups had also developed by then. We have the Vaishnava, the Shaiva, the Shakta, the Kapalika, many more, which in fact, Professor T.M.P. Mahadevan cites in his book, The Advaita, that there were almost 63 vociferous cults or sects which were vying each other for supremacy. It was in this period that Shankara made his appearance, and you could understand how it must be so painful for him to see that rich Vedic culture is being slowly going away from our land. Now, what did he do? Because, as I mentioned, there were this sutra literature on different philosophical terms, and one way sutra, which is written by Badarayana, that was based solely on the Upanishads. As you know, Shankara was attracted to the Upanishads mainly because of its insistence on jnana and also because of its putraishana, vittaishana, and lokaishana, because he himself he believed in sannyasa and he wanted to. He said that the only way that we can achieve moksha is by detaching ourselves from the world. So the Upanishads attracted Shankaracharya, and Shankara, because of that, he started writing a commentary on the Brahma Sutra, and he cites his philosophy of Vedanta in an Ardha Shloka, as we say, half Shloka, Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya, Jivo Brahmaiva Na Paraha. Now, this, as you stated like that, it seems very, very, very simple. What does it say? There is the only, Brahman is the only truth, Brahma Satyam. Jagan Mithya, the world is an appearance. I will not call it an illusion because I don't think Shankara ever meant to call it an illusion. So the translating of the term Mithya is not illusion but an appearance. And Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. And the individual is the same as Brahman and they are not different from each other. Now, this is in a very short form, you get the entire Vedanta or Advaita philosophy, I should say, not Vedanta philosophy, because Vedanta branched out in many other ways. Later on, after Shankara, there were other acharyas who interpreted Vedanta differently. So we have to be careful. Shankaracharya is the person who refined and propagated the Advaita philosophy. Shankara was not the first. Please remember, though Shankara is the most important propagator of Advaita philosophy, there were many other Advaitins before Shankaracharya. He himself mentioned some names, Kasha Krishna, Audalomi, others in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, and there was his Pracharya, that is his Acharya's Acharya, Gaudapada, who had already written a commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad called the Mandukya Karikas. And Gaudapada mentions actually some terms which Shankaracharya used later on in his commentary on the Brahma Sutra. Thus, Adhyasa, Vivarta, Avidya, Maya, Rajju Sarpanyaya. I mean, what are these terms? Adhyasa means superimposition. Now, in the introduction, I will explain each one of these terms. In the introduction to the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, Shankara starts by saying, using these two very important terms, Yushmat Pratyaya and Asmat Pratyaya. Yushmat Pratyaya means the objects in the world. Asmat Pratyaya means the subject who is the one who is experiencing the objects in the world. Now, what happens in the world? The objects are superimposed on the subject and vice versa. I am the body. For instance, when you say, this is my body, I am the body. The I, which is absolutely nirguna, it has no property, it has no adjectival properties, but unfortunately, it gets associated with the body because of ignorance. So this is called adhyasa, and the Sanskrit term adhyasa is normally translated as superimposition. The other one is vivarta, because I just mentioned the world is an appearance. How is it an appearance? Just as it is known as the Rajju Sarpa Nyaya. You see a rope in the dark and you mistake it for you see a rope and you think it is a snake. But then, of course, you pick up some courage and you go there with a stick and you try to touch it. Then you realize it is a rope. Now, but what happened? When you thought it was a snake, it looked like a real snake. So also, this world is superimposed on Brahman, and while it is superimposed, we think it is real, but the underlying reality, which is the rope, is alone real, the sarpa or the snake is false. So also the world is an appearance, and the underlying Brahman alone is the absolute. Now, this is Shankara's amazing contribution because, of course, it is, as I mentioned, it is not his original. He owes a lot to his Pracharya. But the most important thing is, while it was already there in the Agama Shastra, which is Gaudapada's work, but Shankara's uniqueness is because the zeal, the enthusiasm, and the commitment with which he propagated Advaita Vedanta, because he was convinced that the country was slowly losing its basic values. These are the foundational values, and he was keen to retain them. So, what is unique about Shankara, apart from the other Vedantins or the Advaita Vedantins? Shankaracharya looked at as a visionary. He knew that most of the good work which a founder does normally dies when the founder also dies. Now, he had the imagination to realize this truth, and so he made sure that the Advaita principles are inherited by by posterity as well, by writing commentaries on the Prasthanatraya. The Prasthanatraya, I think by now, I'm sure your previous lectures must have covered it. That is, you have the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, and the Bhagavad Gita. These three are known as Prasthanatraya, and Shankaracharya wrote commentaries on all the three. And it so happens that once he set that tradition, the later acharyas like Ramanuja, Madhvacharya, Vallabhacharya, all these persons had also to do the same thing by writing. In order to be able to be called Vedanta Acharyas, they had also to write commentaries or at least explain all these three texts. A question can come up here. Why is the Bhagavad Gita, which is basically, at least in popular imagination, a devotional text? It's a bhakti-oriented text. How come Shankaracharya, who believed so much in knowledge alone, jnana alone, as the path to moksha, how come he took it upon himself to write a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita? Now, I would look at it in this manner because it is important to also give credit to what is popular in the milieu. The feeling is because Shankara is 7th century AD, and the Bhagavad Gita is normally, it's dated round about the 3rd, 4th century BC. It is included in the Mahabharata. And unless and until you address your question to popular text, it does not have much of a chance to succeed. Perhaps, again, Shankara had the vision to see that he had to at least write something on a text which was indeed very popular in the milieu. Now, in that sense, now Shankaracharya, as you can now see, is a pioneer as a visionary. He is a pioneer in many areas. One, of course, the other thing which you have to remember is, why is jnana so important for Shankara? Because he must have witnessed, coming from Kerala, that is the belief that Kerala is the birthplace of Shankara. Kerala is, even today, in my view, is still ridden with excessive ritual. In fact, legend has it that Shivaguru, Shankaracharya's father, himself ran a Gurukula in his house where Karmakanda, he was a Karmakandan and he tutored his Shishyas in Karmakanda. Now, Shankaracharya, as you know, sons don't like what the fathers do. So in a sense, he must have got tired of the excessive rituals which were being practiced in his land. And that is one of the reasons which I would argue that his attraction towards jnana is because of this excessive ritual which was prevalent in the land. Another very important contribution as a visionary by Shankaracharya was unifying the different religions, which I mentioned was almost 63 according to Mahadevan. So he unified or brought these 63 odd religions under 6 headings. I think I mentioned it earlier as well, but because of putting them under 6 headings, he brought them, called them Shaiva, Vaishnava, Shakta, Kaumara, Ganapatya, and Saura. Now, these were, and so he is known because they are 6. That's why I counted them on my fingers, so that you know that these are 6. And these 6, because he brought them all. After all, it can be 6, it can be 8, it can be 10. But if truth is only one, ekam sat vipraha bahudha vadanti, then it can be any number, but they all refer to the same Brahman or Ishtadevata. And so he is called Shanmata Sthapaka. So in a certain sense, why? He was an important religious reformer as well. So not only was he a philosopher par excellence, but he was also a religious reformer. I would now think, I had some questions which I would, yes. Another, which is a very important point, which is what I forgot almost, is that again he had the vision, as I said, that if the original person passes away, anything that they start literally dies with them. So he not only wrote commentaries on the Brahma Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, and the Upanishads, he also started mathas in different parts of the land. People start mathas, people start institutions, but normally they are confined to the places that they normally propagate their ideas. That is why Ramanuja, Madhva, all these people established mathas, but you would find that they were confined to the places in which they propagated their ideas and also where they had a large following. Advaita Vedanta alone, because of Shankaracharya, who it is believed that he went around the country at least 4 times, according to legend, and he established mathas in north, south, east, and west. Excuse me. Of course, TMP Mahadevan again mentions he believes that Kanchi also is the 5th matha that was established by Shankara. Well, there's a dispute about that, but that's not the topic for today. So Shankara had the vision. Because of that, not only is Advaita Vedanta known throughout the land, throughout India, it has also traveled throughout the world. In fact, in later, you will find that in the 20th century, it survived. All the ages, all the commentaries were written. Shankara's commentary, then a commentary upon Shankara's commentary, then a commentary upon a commentary. So this went on till the 17th century. And later on, you have people like Swami Vivekananda, Shivananda. Almost every holy person has been attracted towards Advaita Vedanta, and they have spread the message of Brahman being one or absolute being one, and that can be called by many names. In the world today, there are still difficulties, there are religious differences. Advaita is a solution which offers itself in order to live a harmonious life. And I would end by saying that but for Shankaracharya, maybe this land would not be what it is today. I would like to leave that question in your mind. Think about the greatness of people like Shankaracharya, who could visualize the future and establish on a firm foundation the basic values in society which can enable it to last for a long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rukmini ji, for a very, very nice discussion and concentrating around one single word called harmony. Harmony between the nature on one hand and in the society on the other hand, and harmony between the different members of the society, different sects of the society. No better explanation for having a theoretical base for that harmony of Ekam Eva Sat, and establishment of muts, and in giving the bhashyas on Prasthantri, and the bringing about Shanmat Sthapanam, that was excellently explained by you. That is a visionary character of Shankara in establishing the muts and giving the bhashyas and giving the theoretical base for the harmony and Shanmata Sthapanam. It was really very nice. We are really grateful to you for giving this talk, and if you can continue to listen to the next program, you are welcome. As of now, I don't have any questions, but I don't think that the way in which you explained the visionary characteristics, there cannot be any question on this particular talk of yours. So thank you, Professor.